So let's discuss for a second what red pill means. In a broad sense, it means that you've been introduced to some kind of new truth that has dramatically changed your thinking. And who are the purveyors of this truth is people like Earl, right? They've got us to think a new way. First of all, that's pompous as hell. It's usually not true.
Hey guys, welcome back to the Base Politics Show. I'm Hannah Cox, this week with Jack Hunter and for Brad Palumbo. We're talking about Pearl getting absolutely owned by the godfather of pickup artists, fast food layoffs coming in the Bay Area, and do you share your password with your partner? Let's get into it. Guys, apologies for my humble setup this week. I'm at a last-minute Harry Potter world trip, so I have Hedwig, Pygmy Puff, and a little wand here to set the scene. Jack, are you a Harry Potter fan?
Am I a Harry Potter fan? I'm a little bit too old to have caught that wave. I can say this: in my time in talk radio in the Charleston, South Carolina market when it was popular, I would often defend the Harry Potter books and saying that like kids reading something this thick is awesome. And, people call in, oh, it's witches and the cult and all this stuff. And I'm like, whatever, dude. I believe in God and whatever, but like, no, this is a healthy thing that kids are reading books this big. And yeah, many of my friends and others in my family have been big Harry Potter fans. So,
Well, I'm a huge Harry Potter fan. I'm not a huge amusement park fan. I don't like crowds, and it
sure.
is spring break here. So my fiance sprung this trip on us last minute. We're having fun, but it is a lot of people. And one of my favorite things in walk around the park is like the full grown men. And I'm not saying this critically. I actually really do love it. But the full grown men who are like in robes or they're like posing with their butterbeer in front of the train. It's so cute. I don't know what else like brings that kind of inhibition down for men. So I love to see it. It's really very cute. But we've got some good subjects to cover today, Jack. We've talked about Pearl a good bit on this podcast in the past. So for those who don't know, she's this YouTube grifter. She just bashes women 24/7. She's one of these shock jock types that just says absolutely anything to get attention and throw like red meat to her core audience of incels and men who hate women. And Brad and I both have taken a lot of issue with her because I think that not just think, I feel that the red pill movement is very damaging for the right. It's a huge turnoff to women. We see women leaving the right in droves. To me, what that spells is faster communism. It's not good, right? It's not a nothing burger that women are so turned off to the right and are being pushed left by a lot of this rhetoric. And it's not just rhetoric at this point. We see a lot of policies to match some of the things that they're saying creeping into state legislatures. So we have frequently condemned many of her talking points and narratives, but I saw an interview over the past couple of days that she did. She brought a man onto her show named Ross Jeffries. Full disclosure, I don't really know who Ross Jeffries is. I looked into him a little bit. Apparently, he is known as the godfather of the pickup artist community, which also seems a little shifty. He wrote a 2005 book titled The Game, and basically it seems his life work is to try to help men have better game. What I thought was interesting about this interview, though, is that I would sort of lump a lot of these movements in together, probably, like just off the cuff. I know there's some differences, but like red pill and men's rights and pickup artists and men going their own way and like trad people, all of it kind of falls into this anti-woman sort of bucket to me. But there are some differences, obviously. And right off the cuff from like a 30-second exchange I saw of their interactions, this caught my interest because he seems to be bringing actual scientific information. He seems to actually genuinely care about both men and women and society, which is refreshing. And he's calling her out straight out on her BS. So I want to work through a few of the segments in this interview. We'll put the link in the show notes, guys, if you want to check out the whole thing. But Jack, I'm really curious for your take on some of this. So let's roll this first clip.
About 40 to 50% of the men who come into my events over 30 years, that's tens of thousands of people. That's not marketing. That's literally true. Have undergone some serious trauma in the home, either from bad parenting, from watching their parents go at each other, from emotional abuse to absent caregivers, you name it. So one of the differences in our orientation, and I do respect your orientation, I don't agree with your views, most of them, or how you hold them, but one of our differences, I look at a lot of what you would call slutty behavior or hoe behavior, not as a character flaw, but something that's driven by trauma. So that's one of the things I'd like to dive into today.
Okay. So what do you think all slutty behavior comes from trauma?
No, that's not what I said.
Oh, sorry.
I said when people are traumatized, it interferes with their ability to form pair bonds.
Mhm.
This is solid research if you look into anything that has to do with attachment theory.
Mm.
So, yes, you're right. When you say that slutty behavior gets in the way of forming good pair bonds, you're right. But the causal arrow also goes the other way. The inability to form good pair bonds due to trauma in childhood leads to slutty behavior, because slutty behavior is one way to get attention. It's a, a unhealthy way to do it for many, many reasons. So it goes both ways. So my basic point is what you call slutty behavior and that you sort of attribute to being morally depraved, I see as arising out of trauma. And people who are traumatized ought not to be stigmatized. They ought to be treated with compassion. Doesn't excuse their behavior, doesn't make their behavior attractive. It just explains it in a different way.
So I loved this initial interaction because Pearl and her ilk often talk about women being hoes, women being slutty, and they are using it to demean women and to demoralize them and basically to say like they're very bad people. But what's so wild about this is obviously women aren't being slutty all alone. There are other participants in this equation, right? So I think there's a lot of men being slutty too. And I think that it's perfectly fine to talk about the downfalls of slutty behavior, right? Like, I think there's plenty of evidence to show that it is not healthy for people. And as he says, that it often is coming from like underlying issues, right? It's not really natural that people go out and do this in mass. And I think that typically there is something else going on beneath the surface when you see that kind of behavior occurring. But as he says, that should incur compassion, not you demeaning them. And ultimately, if your real goal is to help people, right? If you're coming from a place of saying, being sexually promiscuous is not good for you, it's not good for other people, it's not good for relationships, your goal should be to want people to change their ways, to approach a more edifying lifestyle, to be able to form healthy bonds to their romantic partners. You would be approaching it in a way that did have compassion and that was aimed at better results versus what I see from the red pill community in Pearl, which is women hit a wall once they're 18, they're used goods if they've had sex, nobody would want somebody over age 21ers had multiple partners. It's very much like, it comes from a place of, and Pearl's made this very clear in her own content, that she has very low self-worth. And I think many of the men in her audience obviously have very low self-worth. They don't feel good about themselves. So they want other people to feel as badly about themselves as they do. I love that Jeffries calls her out on all this, that he pushes back. And you can tell that this is somebody who's actually read some real material, taken some time to understand the actual science behind things, and isn't just popping off online, which is honestly refreshing these days.
Yeah, and I don't know exactly what a pickup artist is either, but we'll leave that discussion for another time. As for Pearl and what's being said in this discussion, a couple of things to unpack here. So there's nothing wrong with being proud of your body, male or female. Like dudes that go to the gym with big biceps that walk around. I might have my opinion about that. I probably would think it's kind of funny. My tap out shirt and look at me, but like, so what? That's okay. They work hard to look like that. A beautiful woman wants to show off in some way. I think that's healthy to a degree. Can it become unhealthy? Sure. But to more of the point of what you said, the problem I have with a lot of these trad people, so any dude who thinks that a woman over 21 is not desirable or 18 or whatever these people said has never talked to many actual women or had interactions. This is some fantasy world and they're not having women life that they lead. I mean, that just tells me that off the bat. Like, that's just weird. That's bizarre. These trad people, and this would be a lot of guys saying this, Pearl's niches, her grift is she's like a woman saying these retrograde kind of things. None of it ever, they claim to be people of faith. It never comes from a place of love. It's what you just said, Hannah. Why would you be demeaning women who you think are showing off their bodies a little too much, slut behavior, whatever you want to call it, instead of saying, hey, what's empty in their life that they're trying to fill the void with this? Maybe I should be compassionate and be loving and look out for them. What Christ would have recommended as opposed to what these people say. That always strikes me as they're not only wrong in what they're saying, but they're pure hypocrites in where they're coming from. So, and it sounds like this gentleman kind of touched on some of that as well in an indirect sort of way.
He did. And Jack, you're going to like this next part a lot because apparently he considers himself a libertarian, and he popped off on her on another one of her frequently used talking points which is that women should not get to vote. And one thing about Pearl, where you know she's a grifter, is she will frequently change her tune. She'll back off a point that she said 100 times the minute she gets pushed back, or she's having any confrontation where she's having to like actually explain herself or defend it. She very quickly like dances around and moves, and all she does in this entire interview is basically completely cowtail to this guy, right? Like she wants him to like her. She's constantly just like, oh, I don't think that anymore. You're about to see that for the first time. But what I like is that not only did he, totally debunk her ridiculous premise that women shouldn't vote, he did it in a very epic libertarian way and actually explained a cohesive theory around how politics should operate and the principles that inform it. And watching her face as she struggles to take it in is actually priceless.
So I'm curious, you said you don't agree with me in a lot of my views. What else do you disagree
Yes,
with?
a bunch of them. And not only do I not
Yeah.
agree with the views, I don't mean to be insulting, but the way in which you go about them, it's not nuanced thinking.
Okay.
So let me make it very clear. I am not a feminist by any means. I am not a leftist. I'm not a liberal. I'm a libertarian. I believe, I need to preface it. I will get to your question. I believe in as little government as possible. I'm very pro-science. I believe if you make a claim, as far as possible, point to the research. If you don't have the research, say it's just my opinion. I'm pro-clear thinking, and I'm also pro-basic human rights, basic democratic rights. So
Okay.
let's get to the first one. Women should
Women
not,
shouldn't vote. Yes.
women shouldn't vote. Let's look at that. Women shouldn't vote. I believe some of your reasoning, because I did my homework on you,
Okay.
is that women just don't know how to make good decisions. They're dumber. They're not good decision makers. Is that a
Well,
fair?
yeah, well, I would say it's because we don't do the hard jobs in society. We don't pay the majority of the taxes. So I've always said as a caveat, if a woman's tax paying, not on child support, not on alimony, and um, or does an infrastructure job, like she's involved in the military, I think that would be more of an exception though than the rule.
So let's look at the logical extension of that idea.
Yeah.
By that reasoning and by that rule, men who do white collar jobs, accountants, attorneys, engineers, should not have the right to vote because they're not doing that hard work.
Well, if they're net taxpayers, they would.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, women pay taxes too. So what are you going to do, Pearl? Let's look at this practically, Pearl. Are we going to review everybody's tax returns to see if they're qualified to vote? If we're really going to stick to your idea and take it beyond a provocation into an actual practical idea, are we going to look at everybody's tax returns? What about people, let me finish. What about people who 1 year are paying a lot of taxes because they're making a lot of money, and the next year they're not making a lot of money, and so they're not paying a lot of taxes?
Right.
Practically speaking,
Yeah.
how do you administer it? You can't do it.
Yeah, that's
number
true.
one.
Okay.
And number two, as a libertarian, I want as little government as possible. But as a libertarian, I think it's a basic fundamental value of any democracy. If you're subject to the laws that the government is going to impose upon you by force, because that's how government imposes its law, it does it by threat of putting you in jail or harming you physically, then you should have a say in what those rules are. It's just, if you are being affected by those laws, you have the right to have a say in it. That's just basic, fundamental human rights. That's basic, enshrined in the Constitution.
I guess for me, it's difficult when you don't have any skin in the game. When you have people voting for more benefits and more handouts that don't face the consequences of paying for them, I guess is where I have a problem. And the women shouldn't vote is more tongue in cheek, because I just think a lot of women. I mean, I just see a lot of useless jobs that we're doing. Human resources, just and
I think that's a strong.
And women that are
sorry.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
I think that's a straw man.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, so there are plenty of women who are judges, plenty of women who are attorneys. I know in my family, and again, this is just a small sample. My family, all the women are professionals. I have a sister who's an entrepreneur, multi-millionaire in real estate. One of my nieces is very, very famous. I'm not going to mention her. ICE knows who she is because she doesn't want her name
Right.
associated with Ross Jeffries. She could buy and sell all of us 20 times over. She's a 2-time best-selling author. She gets $25,000
Yeah.
per speech. So and I know, and I say this with respect, I'm not attacking you.
Yeah.
Your own mother is an incredibly successful CEO. She raised 10 kids.
Mhm.
That woman, you should be kvelling about her. Kvelling is a Yiddish word that means just glowing with joy and boasting about her
Mhm.
with total pride. So if you're going to make it about accomplishment, then how are you going to measure that? And
Mhm.
as far as voting for benefits,
Mhm.
that's a leftist thing.
Yeah.
That's not a feminist thing. That's a leftist thing. I
Mhm.
think I can't speak to the UK.
Yeah.
I'm assuming the UK is worse than the United States. But in the United States, the left has taken over completely.
Mhm.
It's a entitlement state. It's
Right.
a welfare state. And now with the uncontrolled, out of control open border, which is a leftist policy, we have more and more people on the dole.
Right.
And that, again, is a function not of gender, but of the left.
Mhm.
I really, truly believe that. The left is destroying the United States of America. I'm assuming it's not doing a good thing to England either. Again, I don't know.
So, Jack, I love this so much because obviously when she says women shouldn't vote, and you have other men like trolls that try to say this online, repeal the 19th, it becomes obviously for good reason a very emotional debate for many people, right? But I liked how he handled her because he didn't get emotional at all. He
Yeah.
just dealt with this on the premise of like, your argument is incoherent. It's not based on logic. It's not based on reason. It's not even based on practicality. Like, even you very quickly admit there's no way to implement this. It doesn't actually make any sense. And then she says, oh, people who are paying taxes and aren't living on the government should be able to vote. But then that means a lot of men shouldn't get to vote too, right? And just her whole way of allocating that makes no sense. When in reality, the very basic principle is that in order to have an ethical government, in order for you to have a system where people will not be barbaric to one another, where they can handle their differences in a peaceful way and coexist, is to have a system of government where every single person has representation. They have the ability to go in and plead their case with those who represent them, to vote them out, to keep them in office. They are able to petition their government. They have fundamental representation. And this is one reason that our founding has been so corrupted, because we didn't live up to that very basic premise that every single person has a natural inherent right to participate in their government. And especially when the government is going to have the ability to take your money, to take your livelihood away, to influence your basic interactions in the world, it is immoral and unethical to ever argue that any person should not have actual representation in the system. This is one reason that I would say it's actually immoral what we currently do, where we remove felons' ability to vote. I think that that is absolutely wrong and can be constitutionally overturned.
Yes, once you've served your time and you know, been punished according to what the state says you need to be punished, those rights should be returned. I agree with everything you just said, Hannah. For starters, why would a woman demean her own sex and say, like, we don't do the hard jobs or we shouldn't be represented?
Welcome to
That's not
Pearl.
right. And, I agree with a lot of these trad people that Western culture is superior in so many ways, and we could talk about that. But one of them is that we strive for equality for all. In other cultures, they don't do that. Women are still second or third class citizens. And in the United States, we've made great strides, the 19th Amendment being one of them. So do they want to be less like Western culture? Is that what's going on here? They don't think about it that way because a lot of these people are too dim to think about anything beyond being contrarian jerks online. But yeah, like, I like how he approaches her. It's easy to be outraged at something as stupid in 2024 as saying women shouldn't vote. I mean, it's easy to be like, how dare you? But he doesn't lose his head. He's like, I'm a libertarian. I believe in these things. You don't make any sense on the face of your argument, Pearl. So yeah, kudos to
And,
him for his
and
smooth style.
not only is he pushing back on Pearl, but on the entire movement, of which I again would think pickup artists are a little bit a part of this community, but I'm not as educated on them. So guys, if you're more familiar with it, please feel free to correct me in the comments. I'm not, by any means clinging to this opinion, but my perception is that they would fall into this group of larger, men's rights activists, anti-women kind of dialogue. And the problem that I have, especially with the right being somewhat receptive increasingly to these kinds of people, to these groups, is that their entire worldview is antithetical to the very foundations that conservatives and libertarians are supposed to believe in, which are limited government, individual liberty, and free market capitalism, right? Because in order to carry out many of the things they claim to want, as he points out, it would take a very, very big government, a lot of intrusion into your life, very costly to implement. It's just kind of childish, when you hear them say these things, when you really push them on the practicality of it. You can tell, and this is why I think it is a grift for most of them. There's no real thought that goes into that. There's no real serious people who think any of this is actually something that would be achieved or should be achieved. They just want to pop off online, and they want to make women feel bad because they feel bad about themselves.
No, I think that's right. It was funny to me, this sort of trend, alt-right or alt-right adjacent, these kind of voices started to kind of get some traction online around COVID or right after COVID, when your average conservative would be like, you can't tell me to wear a mask, you can't tell me to do this. And they're wanting all these laws and regulations to make people do things that culturally nobody would want to do anyway, including not having women vote anymore. So, yeah.
Yeah. Well, let's go on to their next exchange, because this was kind of rapid fire. I mean, he did not let up on her one bit, and I personally loved watching her squirm.
And that's what I found when I was trying to talk to like men's rights advocates in the UK. It was basically that it's tough for them to get any things passed because women are the biggest swing voters in elections.
I don't know.
I didn't think that was. I mean, if you look at the last election, it was like that was the biggest voting bloc that voted Democrat.
I don't know if that's true or not. I just don't have the data. I don't know if that's true or not. But what I will say, it's people who are voting for leftist policies across the board. That's what's destroying. I don't know that it's a gender thing. I just don't. I really just don't know. And I think it's a leftist thing. The left is, and this is going to turn into a political show.
Yeah.
But as a libertarian, I'm against any group that's trying to grow big government. And so, by the way, I think one of your policies would result in a huge growth in big government and putting people on the dole. We can get to that in a minute.
Okay, go ahead.
Banning divorce.
Oh, I changed my mind on that, actually.
Well, wait a minute.
That one I changed my mind.
Yeah. Wait a minute. So what you're saying is everything you said in the past is either untrue or doesn't bear the same amount of weight as the opinion that you're now carrying. Is that what you're saying?
No, I'm saying that I used to believe in banning divorce, and then I decided that was a bad idea.
And why is that?
I don't think you should force people to be together. I guess like I liked it in theory, and then I thought about it more, and I was just like, no, I know some people that are in some terrible marriages that they would be miserable for a lifetime if they stayed together. It's like, yeah, that was kind of the thought process that I had.
Okay, so what you're saying, and I agree with you, but what you're saying is people living together who are unhappy, taking away, enforcing that preserving that is no longer as important as protecting the family and protecting children. You're putting individual happiness above preserving the family, which I thought was one of your fundamental values. The family is the building block of society.
Yeah.
Now you're saying, no, it's personal happiness.
Yeah, I know. It kind of conflicts a little bit, if I'm being honest, but it's just
conflicts a lot.
So you're one of those swinging voters then.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, I guess. No, because I don't know. I've seen, especially like interviewing doing the divorce documentary. It's like I'll interview guys that have been in a sexless marriage for like 5 years, right? Their wives gained I think 80% of women gain 20 pounds in the first 5 years, something like that. And I'm just like, and they're forced to do that for life. So I know it kind of conflicts, but I changed my opinion on it.
So a few things I love about this segment. One, she often just pops off about random data that when you push her on, she cannot cite. And it's because she's making it up. And this is what I've seen so often with these types, is that they really are these like fringe, total nut jobs. They try to pretend like they have actual scientific data backing them up. Like, oh, this percentage of women do this, and this percentage of issues are from this. They don't even know how to read the basic data they're claiming exists. The data doesn't exist. And when you push them, you find out like, oh, it's not really based on anything other than you popping off the hip. They don't even know how to read the science if it was in front of them. So he's very swiftly dismantling her. I mean, piece by piece. And then what's interesting is as he's pushing her on this, I mean, obviously banning divorce is asinine. That's ridiculous. It's totally stupid. It would get people killed at the end of the day. The fact, though, that when she starts backing off of it, she starts arguing for personal autonomy. She starts arguing for individualism as he's pushing her and saying, well, basically people do need to be able to be happy, as if this just occurred to her. She just shifted her mind on this. She had this groundbreaking revolution that people need to be able to be happy. But notice it's not about women being happy. It's only because, oh, men shouldn't have to be with women if they gain a little weight. I mean, it's really all over the place. And honestly, if I was a man, even if I was a man who hated women, this would be the last person I want speaking for me, because you make me sound so much worse than I could ever dream of being, honestly.
We have known people, at least, that have been in abusive relationships that were marriages that, thank God, they're not in those anymore. I talked about the man or the woman could be the victim or some combination of both. I mean, all that's true. So you don't want to keep people stuck in those situations. Somebody like her, who's famous online for, it's just like you said, Hannah, they say something outrageous, but there hasn't been any real thought, or certainly no deep thought, about the practicality, why you would say this. The point is to say it, get a reaction, and then she's taken apart very quickly by the person that's interviewing her. And she even said she changed her mind before he even really pressed her. So, these people would hate this comparison, and I'm not trying to have a discussion about this subject, but do you remember a number of years ago, the pro-choice activist saying, "I shout my abortion"? Do you remember all that? And however you feel about that issue, I'm not trying to have that discussion. That's a kind of grotesque thing to say. It's something way too serious to celebrate or to put it in that way. These people are the right-wing versions of that. They just say something outrageous like that. They are those people. They're the mirror image. That would outrage them to hear that. But sorry, folks, that's what you are.
Yeah. And it's crazy to me that we've seen so many people within the right-wing stratosphere, people who are supposed to be credible people, like legitimate journalists, legitimate politicians, like welcome these people in with open arms, right? The minute, and this is something the right has got to check itself on, the minute somebody starts to get like online popularity, the right is so desperate to be cool, so desperate to be liked. And if they in any way think they have like some inroads with them, they're like, yes, please like me, like me, like me. And they try to start working with them and platforming them, and they have no scrutiny, and they have no wisdom, and they have no forethought. And ultimately, again, the fact that these people have been listened to and platformed is turning people away. It is why they will continue to lose major, major battles that they need to be winning. It is a real issue. Moreover, outside of just the political sphere, what they're doing, these messages are damaging. They're damaging for women. They're damaging for men. They're damaging for relationships, for families, for society at large. This is not something that we should be empowering or elevating in any way. And furthermore, this is not just isolated to online conversation. We are seeing some policies along these lines beginning to be introduced. There's some jackass down in Texas that tried to introduce a bill recently, a Republican, to ban no-fault divorce. We see this starting to creep up. These are terrible, illiberal, unconstitutional ideas that the right should be wholeheartedly rejecting. And instead, we see them play around with it, and they're going to get burned. They're going to get burned by playing with this fire, because these people are being laid bare for what and who they are. And many of us saw it all along. I want to roll these last two clips back to back, actually. I will knock them out. But one of them, she basically tries to go on her typical BS by saying women are far more narcissistic than men. And he checks her. And then she talks about the notion that men only want to be with virgins, which is a creepy, pedophilic assertion, honestly. And he takes her down on both. So let's roll these last two.
So you deflected. You said women are more narcissistic than men. So here's the science. The science, and this is a review published in the Psychological Bulletin 2015, drew on 365 sources, including journal articles, dissertations, technical manuals, blah, 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 showing that aspects of that narcissism is more common in men than women. And further, it showed that antisocial personality disorder is more common in men than women. Now, you can have your personal observations, but your personal observations are what we call in science a distorted reading and an inadequate sampling. Okay. Science, and I told you I'm pro-science and pro-clear thinking, is designed to prevent that. It's designed to prevent distorted readings and inadequate samplings. You can have your personal opinion, but it's just a personal opinion based on a very small sampling. I'm telling you, the scientific research
Mhm.
shows that you're just not correct. You
Yeah.
just aren't.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, okay. I mean, I I still think that women are more narcissistic. So I don't know,
Well, that's like saying, Pearl,
Yeah.
with respect,
Mm.
that's like saying, I still think that the sun goes around the earth, even though astronomy shows otherwise.
Mhm. Well, I don't know because, I just think people can make up studies that say anything. And it's like they want
I
you to
don't,
not they want
okay,
you to not believe what's in front of your own eyes. And that's just kind of
okay,
how I see it, Go ahead.
okay. This is a meta data study from over
Mhm.
355 sources. 355 sources in a meta analysis are not going to make up are not going to make something up. That's not how science works.
Okay.
I'm sorry. This is a point. If you want to have that as your view, you can,
Okay.
but it's anti-science and it's contrary to the facts.
I don't think men value purity. Why do you think that?
Okay, hold on just a minute. That's a little bit of a misquote. Well, first let's unpack what
Okay.
specifically in any kind of intelligent discussion we have to define our terms. So what do you mean by, I'm going to ask you,
Mhm.
what do you mean by purity?
Um, well, I just have a list of the things you wanted to talk about, and that was number 2.
Okay.
What
All
so
right. Then let's
so
talk
I
about
don't
that.
know.
What I meant, all right. So
Okay, go
what I
ahead.
meant is I don't even know what purity means, but you also said men want virgins. That's my real point of contention.
Yeah.
This idea that men want virgins, maybe if you're a religious nutbag
Mhm.
and if you have sex before marriage, you'll offend Jesus
Yeah.
because God doesn't want you putting your pee-pee into a woo-woo before there's a ceremony.
Mhm.
In Yiddish, they say no chuppah, no shtuppah. Chuppah is the marriage thing that you stand under, and shtuppah is to screw.
Mhm.
There's not. This is the view of religious. This is like if you're a religious Catholic or Orthodox Jew, or God forbid,
Mhm.
a a fundamentalist Islamist radical like a Taliban who will kill a woman if she's not a virgin uh, before she's married. This idea that men want virgins is completely nutty. Where you're drawing it from, I don't know. Where are you
Yeah.
getting that?
Um, you know, what's funny? I'm sorry. It's kind of interesting because I don't know. The last couple of months, my views have evolved a little bit. So, so I know I don't mean to like switch them. I'm not doing this just because you're here. But the last couple of months, because I do think I came from a bit of like a religious worldview, and some of that's kind of crashed the last couple months, to be honest,
Good. It
because it just
should.
doesn't line up.
All right, I've heard enough.
All right. So Jack, I just want your general reaction to that. I think we all know what I think about the core of the substance, but watching her dance is sure fun because he just keeps cornering her and she just keeps trying to pivot. It's so ridiculous.
He's got her goad. She hasn't thought much about this stuff as we've said repeatedly. I had two thoughts watching, him saying, if you're a religious nut or whatever, you might want virgins, so that's a thing. Well, that goes two ways. Sure, that's the tradition, whether you're a person of faith or not, recognizes that that's a thing, virgin birth, all of that. But I would also say I was listening to a woman, I can't remember her name, who called herself a Christian feminist recently on some podcast. And she made the point, she's like, all feminism comes from Christianity. I listened. She's like, who found Christ when he on the resurrection? What we celebrated yesterday, it was 3 women. If you were wanting to lie about it, you would have made it men and during that period because women were considered less than. And all throughout the Bible, Mary Magdalene, I'm not trying to have a religious discussion, but these people pose as trads. Oh, all men want virgins. They try to demean women's worth. Oh, they're a virgin, they're worth more. Well, actually, they have a brain and a soul, and they're a person. They're not just as commodity. In the Bible, women are elevated. Christ treated them equally. That's who first saw them. And I'm not trying to have a religious discussion, but why don't they pick that tradition? Because that's not what they're trying to do. They're trying to be nasty. And she's, that's her niche. So
I think that's a great point. My dad's a pastor, and I've often heard that pointed out that really Christianity is the beginning of seeing women treated as actual equals and valuables and something that had autonomy and had, prestige and value in the eyes of God. And so it really is something that I think started to change the course of history. And you can certainly see the impacts of that in the Bible and then really start to look at the historical ramifications and how it unfurled from there. So you're right. They are looking, and Christianity is about redemption. So even if you do think people have made mistakes and maybe they slept with too many people, like Jesus would never be condemning them. He would be saying, change your ways. This isn't good for you. But he wouldn't say, you're gross, you're worthless, you've messed up forever. That's the opposite of the message of the gospel. So people pretending to be trads and pushing this narrative are vipers, as the Bible would call them.
Yeah.
And
They don't
all
get
right,
it.
I want to roll this last little exchange because he gets her to denounce the red pill, or at least to disassociate from the red pill movement. It's a great little moment. So we'll close with this for this segment.
I admire your hard work, and I also think you're anti-science and you don't do nuance thinking. I just
Okay.
do. It's just evident to me from not only listening to you here, but watching your videos. And this is also part of red pill. This is my objection to red pill.
I don't know.
Red pill.
I don't know if I'm red pill because I don't know. They I don't like to identify as. Oh shoot, sorry. I like identify as it because people get mad, and I don't know. I just I just kind of give my opinions. But go ahead. Sorry.
No, I finished. I made my point.
So let's discuss for a second what red pill means. In a broad sense, it means that you've been introduced to some kind of new truth that has dramatically changed your thinking. And who are the purveyors of this truth is people like Pearl, right? They've got us to think a new way. First of all, that's pompous as hell, and it's usually not true, especially because of the fact they haven't thought about this stuff that much, and they just put stuff out there. So it's not even true, but in their, I'm not going to try to personally insult them, in their minds, this is just like a big deal. Look, I've always pointed out that a lot of these people are personality types, and wherever they end up ideologically is second. The guy who organized the Unify, the Right, or whatever the hell it's called, the neo-Nazi thing in Charlottesville a couple of years ago, started in the Occupy movement. So he went that far left or that far right. He was always the same weird dude, but he was going to do weird stuff politically either way. I think that's what a lot of these people are like. She could be a socialist next week or next year. I don't know the trajectory, but they want to be extreme in what they're saying. And that's what I pick up first, besides what they're saying, because it's usually so foolish.
That's right. They just want attention more than anything else, and people need to stop falling for it and actually look for consistency in people. I've said for some time, I can follow people I disagree with as long as they're consistent, they're thoughtful, they actually have put work into their ideology. What I can't deal with is grifters like this, and I just love seeing them exposed. And I like that she was taken down by kind of one of her own. And, the difference in him and her, without knowing much about the pickup artist community or anything like that, I know that the point of it, is to help men score with women, basically. And maybe some of that's ethical, maybe some of it's not. I really can't say. But he seems genuinely interested in helping people. He starts off the interview, I didn't put this in the close, so he talks about the number of people he can prove who have been helped in his workshops, and he seems genuinely interested with the human condition and finding better ways for men and women to, have relationships that are working. And so he seems to be coming from a much better spot. Maybe I'll check out more of his work. But we'll put a pin in it for now. We've got to move on to a more policy-related story. Jack, what do we have going down in California?
So we have a lot of our friends on the left who have been pushing for many, 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 many years about raising the minimum wage to unsustainable levels. This is from San Francisco Gate. Pizza Hut franchises laid off more than 1,200 delivery drivers at California locations last month. It appears that more restaurants are following suit ahead of the state's $20 minimum wage increase, according to the Wall Street Journal. Now, that increase went into, when we're recording, today is April 1st. That's supposedly when it's going into effect. The story continues. The Wall Street Journal also reported that some California fast food restaurant operators are curbing store hours. That's less hours, so that means less pay overall, or closing on slower parts of the day. Also less pay if you're an employee, less opportunity. Story continues, but did not list which restaurant claims were doing so. And the last part reads, leading up to the minimum wage increase on April 1st, which affects fast food chains with more than 60 locations nationwide. So they're justifying this by saying it's just the big guys, right? Story continues. Multiple California franchises have issued layoffs or plan to do so. Excalibur Pizza, which owns multiple Round Table Pizza locations. I'm in South Carolina right now, so I don't know where that is, but it's West Coast. Story continues, is expected to lay off 70 of its delivery drivers on April 19th at franchise locations in various cities of the list. But the point here, Hannah, we've seen this story a million times. You certainly covered it. Brad's covered it. I wish everybody could make $1,000 an hour. That would be nice, but that's not how basic economics works. When you do that, they raise the price for consumers, or there's less people working. It happens every time. We're seeing that with these massive layoffs these delivery drivers, these franchises on the West Coast.
All right, Jack, I have to read you one quote I found in another article about this that is just particularly bonkers. This is reporting from 2KUTV, and they interviewed a Cal State Bakersfield economics professor named Aaron Hedge. And when I read you this quote, it's just going to encapsulate everything you need to know about the state of economics departments at colleges across this country, because it is truly unhinged and devoid of any economic theory whatsoever. And basically, he told them that because this isn't too big of a jump, because their minimum wage was $16, now it's $20 an hour, he doesn't expect too big of an impact on jobs. That's $4 increase an hour is actually a pretty large jump, by the way. But he said, I don't think there'll be a huge impact on the layoffs in the food industry. Still, there might be a bit of an impact on prices. It may not have that much impact nationwide, but if you were to look at California, that average cost at a fast food place might go higher to compensate for the higher wages. But he said it all comes down to what people are willing to sacrifice. Ultimately, it's about deciding that we are willing to pay more for the things that we buy, because then that gives people who work a fair wage. My jaw hit the ground. I mean, I know that they are economically illiterate, but man, to say that with a straight face, to genuinely say that and just be like, well, this is just a little compromise about how much we're willing to pay for things to ensure people have a fair wage. One, many people cannot afford to pay more for things, especially things like fast food, which is where a lot of people in poverty are relying to feed their families right now. And secondarily, the basic assertion that in paying more for that food to give them a fair wage, it's not going to lead to all prices going up in general, is crazy. It does not matter how much money you make. It matters how much your money can buy. And when you do things like this, everybody can afford to buy less things. Your purchasing power goes down. Those workers who are being paid a fair wage are not going to have a higher quality of life, because their dollar is going to be devalued as the price of goods goes up to make up for the labor cost. This is economics 101. 1 and 1 is 2. We've tried this over and over and over. They're on a hamster wheel of destruction that never works out, and they just keep running faster. I mean, I truly cannot fathom how detached from reality you'd have to be to hold this opinion. It's mind-boggling.
It really is. And look, you don't have to be an Austrian economist to understand the fact that the people who push this kind of thing think debt doesn't matter, endless government spending doesn't matter, that it's not going to come back to bite us. And they genuinely think it is mind-boggling. Hannah, I agree that we can make people, they could get paid more, and it's not going to affect their jobs or cost. And another effect this has is people, like you said, poverty, or just people with not a lot of means, eat fast food. You eat cheaper food, and they can't afford it to go 50 cents up or $1 up. So it affects everything across the board. And the reverse is true. That people don't see the positive of basic economics when it's paid attention to. There are places that will pay higher or much more than minimum wage because they have the volume to do so, and people probably want to go work at those places, if that makes sense. And if their products cost more, they might not be able to pay those wages. Nobody ever looks at stuff like that. So it works across the board if people just follow basic common sense, but you're correct, Hannah, they do not.
Yeah, they sure aren't, Jack. All right, let's move on to our last segment of the day. I saw a poll that caught my interest, and before I read you the results, I'm curious, do you share passwords in your relationship with your significant other?
I think maybe one or two. My girlfriend and I, we look at different things, so not much. Maybe like Netflix or Hulu or something like that.
Yeah. Well,
So,
Logan and I do, and we always have, but I would never go through his phone. No, not never, but like, I have a policy. I used to go through boyfriends' phones in the past, and then I realized years ago, 7, 8 years ago, why would I be with somebody when I felt the need to go through their phone? Like, if I'm dating somebody and I feel the need to go through their phone, I don't really need to know much else, because as a woman with intuition, I already know. If I get that feeling, I'm going to find something. It's like magic. Never. Men need to stop discounting women's intuition, man, because it is fires at 100. So that's kind of, to me, like a red flag, right? If I get the feeling I need to look through your phone, to me, I'm like, might be time to step away from this relationship then, because you're probably doing something. I just think it's kind of degrading to do that. Like, I don't want to go through your phone. I don't want to be in a relationship where I feel the need to go through your phone. But that being said, we've always had each other's passwords. We do use each other's phones. We share a lot of account information, but not all of it. Like, he wouldn't have my social media accounts, because why would he? But he would have other passwords. So I saw this poll. It more so focused on phones. It was a poll for men and women. It said, should your spouse be able to ask for your phone and look through it? Now, note he is saying spouse, so that is kind of a different commitment level, based for some people than others. But what I thought was so interesting were the results. So can you read the results for us, for our audio listeners? Because this didn't go how I thought it would.
All right, here's our poll. Poll for men and women. Should your spouse be able to ask for your phone and look through it? 39% of men, I guess, said yes. 30.9%, that'd be 31%, said no. For women, yes was at 18.6%, and women, no was at 11%. So obviously men think you should be able to do this more than women, but I gotta tell you, I don't think you could be in a relationship, still be an individual. I'll tell you, my basis for what a healthy relationship is my mom and dad, who were both, my dad was always a huge flirt. My mom was and is a huge flirt at 71 years old. And that was part of what they loved about each other, and they trusted each other. Like, where's he at? Where's she at? There's none of that. So I was raised, I'm not a jealous personality. If I'm dating somebody, it means I trust it. That's part of why I love them. And the moment I don't trust them anymore, I don't want to be with them. That's it. It's basically what you just said. So yeah, you have your own individual phones and your own personal information. When it gets to that point, it's not worth pursuing anymore, in my opinion. It's not loving anymore.
Now, what I thought was interesting was this was not a small sample size. This was done on Twitter, X, but it had 6,350 votes, which is a pretty good sample size for a poll. But I was surprised at the male and female breakdowns. I would have thought, one, that females would be more likely to go through phones and that they would be, therefore, more invested in the idea that you should share information. But this actually went the other way. So I thought that was interesting, and that made me wonder, is it a perception that women are more likely to go through your phones than men? And I don't know. Only men can answer that for me. So let me, guys, in the comments, be honest. I want you to tell me, do you go through your girlfriend or spouse's phones? If you're a man, I'm very curious about this, and I won't tell on you. I just need to do my own little sampling here, because that's an interesting theory, and it makes me, I do think probably it happens more than we're led to believe, because it's kind of a social stereotype, right? That women are more insecure and women are more jealous and women are, and I don't think that that's accurate, actually.
Well, I guess I'm going to be super trad here. That might be the case, Hannah, but I will say, and I can't even remember where I read this. This was years ago, but they were talking about differences between men and women, or mothers and fathers, that if you have a kid, a mother would be much more likely, in the traditional stereotype of what a mother would do, to go through their dresser drawers or their private things to make sure their kid was okay. Whereas a father might be more inclined, let him make a mistake, let him learn. So maybe that's just me speculating on something I read years ago. Maybe I don't know what I'm talking about, but I don't think that's a stretch to say at least that. So maybe that has something to do with the poll.
Well, I tried to do a little digging, and I couldn't find exact data, but I found an article at The Cut, and they wrote, according to a 2014 Pew Research report, a small majority of people do share some passwords, with 67% of internet users in a marriage or committed relationship saying they've shared the password to one or more of their online accounts with their partner. It's worth noting that the study didn't ask about screen lock codes that open sesame to text messages, emails, and notes apps. In a 1,000-person survey by consumer cybersecurity company Comparitech in January 2019, 47% of respondents said they shared their passwords to Instagram, Facebook, and other social media with their partners, though that number went up to 53% for married folks versus those who are in non-married relationships. And they also noted that the most common passwords to share were what you mentioned, Netflix, Hulu. I don't know why I'd ever share my social media. I think that to me feels more invasive, right? But maybe because so much of my business is my social media, but that would make me weird. I wouldn't like that. But phones, Hulu, I guess it's just based on why do you need it, right? But I think if you're so if you're going through my social media accounts, it's probably because you think people are DMing me or something and you want to read my DMs, which I don't engage in that kind of stuff anyway. So that would feel like crossing a line and kind of invasive. And I do think what you said, I think you're entitled to privacy. There's certainly a line, even though Logan has my passcode, where if he was going through my phone, I would feel violated. I don't want you reading all my personal text messages to friends that could be about personal things for them even, that aren't your business, or things with my family. You're entitled to some level of privacy. Though I guess all in all to say, there's kind of a fine line. It could definitely lead to very controlling behavior, right? If somebody wants too much of your information, is going through too much, that could be a red flag. But then on the other side, if somebody doesn't want to share anything with you, yeah, I'd kind of assume you're doing something wrong. So I think it's very touch and go, I guess.
Well, that's them, you being too secretive, and it seems suspicious, and that gets back to the trust issues we talk about. Social media is kind of an intimate thing. It would make sense from a business perspective for maybe me to have access to you or Brad's account or vice versa, but I'd feel very weird about it. It's not me, it's you. or be somebody posing as you. I've had to, be somebody else on large accounts before in the past for interviews, and it was okay because they trusted me to say what they would say, but it feels like a heavy responsibility that you would take seriously. Yeah.
Yeah, it is.
Boyfriends, girlfriends, husbands, wives, that I wouldn't cross that line. That means something's wrong if you're having to do that.
Yeah, same. I've actually had a lot of people like you or Brad. My sister does some assistant work for me on the side. Like, I've had people who are in my back end of my accounts before, but it's always for work reasons. It's not just because they're like snooping around. So I wouldn't like that.
Sure.
All right. Well, let's move on to our hot take segment. Jack, do you have one ready, or I can go first if you don't?
Sure, you go first.
All right, I'll go first. As I mentioned, I'm down at Harry Potter World, so I was on the road for like 7 hours between here and Atlanta. And I've thought this for a while, but I was just reminded, I think billboards are stupid and a total waste of time for the most part. There's only one reason for a billboard. The only time I think it's worth money. And it's like, if you're a restaurant or establishment coming up that people might want to stop at, right? Like, then that's helpful because I'm like, oh, not that we have this here, I wish, but like In-N-Out Burger and 5 exits, or like, oh, Buc-ee's and like 4 exits. Like, that's helpful information. I might pay attention to that and be likely to get off. Anything past that, I can't read it. Who has eyesight that good? 2, even if I can read it, I can't take any action if I'm driving. So I'm not going to like call a phone number or click a website or turn to like your podcast. Like, I'm not doing any of that. So I'm going to forget about it. And then on top of that, a lot of billboards just get real weird, especially down here in the Deep South. It's a lot of like, Jesus will send you to hell. And I'm like, I just don't know what the point of that is. You know what I'm talking about.
I do.
Like rural Southeast, it's a lot of fire and brimstone. The billboards get pretty dark pretty fast. So I don't get them. I would never employ them as a business unless I was, again, one of those like specific kinds of businesses.
They're a distraction. I will make an exception for the south of the border billboards in North and South Carolina on 95. So those can be pretty entertaining, at least if somebody as dim-witted as myself. My hot take, if it counts as a hot take, is I had sushi 5 times in a row last week for dinner. I just got on this weird kick. Is that really healthy, or am I going to get mercury poisoning? I don't know.
Jack, if you're wrong, I don't want to be right. I've done this many times.
Yeah, I mean, it's just healthy. I want it taste-wise. That was what I was craving, but I'm like, a lot of raw fish might not be so great. But I Googled it, and some were like, oh, you're fine. Some were like, oh, man.
I think as long as you're not pregnant, you're okay.
Okay, well, I'm not, so we're good.
Yeah, that's what I tell myself anyways. I definitely have those binges where I'm like, do I have a sushi problem? But again, if I do, then everybody deserves their vices. So I say have at it. All right, guys. Well, that's a wrap for the week. Jack, thanks so much for filling in. Good to have you as always. Don't forget, guys, leave us a like and a comment. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. And until next week, stay based.